and he is in the studio, President and CEO, Mississippi Center for Public Policy.
Morning, Paul.
How'd you like the music behind that patriotic music?
I loved it. A bit of God Save the Queen behind my riff on America being the greatest country in the world. I love the combo.
I thought you would appreciate that one way or the other. Regardless of what Boris has been saying lately, my understanding was that I heard some clip. Did you hear that? A clip of saying that America is back now?
Boris says lots of things. I can't keep up. What was his latest?
I think in reference to Biden's election, said America is now back.
I've been sending lots of messages to lots of former colleagues in the House of Commons saying how wonderful that America is. So hopefully, America's never really been away, though.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the program that you are underway with and pushing, and this is the tax to do away with the state income tax. And I'm sure you've heard some of what John Reed, the appropriation chair, was saying. And it looks like all smiles, and it was good in the House, and it's going to be a fight in the Senate. Your thoughts?
Isn't it wonderful? Here is a bill to actually cut taxes and allow Mississippians to keep more of their own payroll. I think it's wonderful. This is going to be good for the Mississippi economy if it goes through, because it means a big pay increase for Mississippians, more money to spend. It's also morally the right thing to do. It means that Mississippians, when they earn that paycheck, they're able to spend their money on their families and their priorities rather than trusting
It is a little bit like going through withdrawal as far as an addiction is concerned on the government's part. But when you have people like Trey Lamar and others who've spent basically about 4 or 5 years putting this together, and you see that it's not only it's not a win-lose, it's a win-win for both of us.
Every liberty-loving Mississippian should cheer them for this initiative. It's not perfect in the sense it doesn't abolish income tax 100%, but it is a huge step in that direction, and it means that 60% of Mississippi workers won't pay any income tax at all. And if you're a married couple, you'll need to earn $95,000 before you pay any income tax. This is a massive, massive boost to the incomes of ordinary folk.
I think when you start looking at this, and somebody had mentioned earlier that if you're retired and you don't have a state income and you're on retirement, then you're going to be paying a little bit more as far as sales tax is concerned. But at that level, retirees usually...
Well, hold on a second.
Not paying more for income tax, paying more because of sales tax.
Well, hold on a second. This is going to be a net reduction in the amount of money that the state government in Mississippi spends. It's going to be a tax break, a $2 billion tax break. Now, that's not going to be evenly distributed. People on sort of 50,000 or below 50,000 will benefit disproportionately more than others. But, I'm not an advocate for higher taxes anywhere, but generally speaking, I think it's morally good that if you're going to have to levy taxes, and you do, sadly, you should tax consumption rather than income. Because if you tax income, it makes Mississippi uncompetitive, and it means you get lower incomes.
I think there was a lot of validity, too, and we talked about it with Chairman Reed a few moments ago. There is some validity in what Trey said, and you don't think about this, but the base of those paying income tax over the years, same thing on a national level as far as Washington, D.C., because you have a lot of these corporations and these one-percenters, as Bernie Sanders loves to say, who are not paying their fair share. But they are the ones advocating a Democrat in the White House and at the same time talking about we need to be paying more. But they'll have a lawyer somewhere write something in there that it happens every single time. The only reason that they're putting their money behind a Democrat is they know that they'll fashion and they will have the landscape done as far as that bill.
Isn't it so true when people on the radical progressive left talk about higher taxes on those who can afford them? What they generally mean is middle-income earners, because the super rich can find lawyers and fancy ways of avoiding paying tax at all. And they do. They're rich enough to afford lawyers to advise them on how not to pay tax.
I haven't seen it, and maybe you have some numbers on that, but the underground economy in the state of Mississippi that's not taxed, that they don't pay taxes on. I remember once we had a conversation with the former Department of Revenue, Herb Frierson, and Herb and I were talking about that on the air one time and off the air, and there is a sizable number of people or businesses that pay no income tax at all. by the time you take those that legally get by it because of some caveat and those who just are cheats.
I'm sure with the cash economy that must be a factor. But do you know what? I suspect with digital payments and digital processes, it's probably not as big a problem, or not going to be as big a problem anyway in a few years' time. I think the real priority with tax policy is to reduce the amount of tax.
That's a good point. Good point. So what else do you like about this?
I think the really exciting thing is that the tax on groceries is going to be cut, because there are families in Mississippi who probably struggle to make ends meet. And we all know that making sure that you can meet your grocery bill is pretty important. So giving a tax break to people through their grocery bills, I think that's really good. You know, it's not a perfect bill. It's not. The Axe the Tax campaign that we're running at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy is about eliminating the income tax entirely, and our campaign will be carrying on until we've achieved that. But this is a big step forward. Ronald Reagan said many years ago that as a conservative, if you can get 70 or 80% of what you want, you take it. We're not getting 100% of what we want, but this is a huge step in the right direction. Let's take it.
I think John said that to me off the air. He said, you know, it's not a perfect bill. But here's the part: take it over to the Senate, make it better. Find a way to do that. Send it back over, and let's make it a even better bill than it is now.
And everyone who believes in freedom should get behind this bill on both sides of the aisle.
More I want to talk. Can you stick around for a moment?
I'd love to.
Let's review what happened. All right, we get back with it. I would have thought that would have elicited some comment somewhere. That's not fair at all.
No, I'm just going to leave that alone, because anything I say will get me in trouble.
Back with Douglas Carswell, President and CEO, Mississippi Center for Public Policy. There are other things going on beside this one, but are you guys ready to know that the knives are going to be coming out from the special interest groups as far as Axe the Tax? Because a lot of these groups live from big government.
If they're not attacking us, we're not doing the right thing. We're here to advocate for liberty, and all the vested interests who don't like liberty, who don't like American exceptionalism, who don't like conservatism, the more they attack us, the more we're doing the right thing.
The hard part is just explaining this and letting people know that you're going to come out better, and it's going to be better for the state long term. If you care about the state, you want your kids here, you want the state to progress, this is the way to do it.
Absolutely.
In a lot of ways, it has a lot of commonality with the flag. And understand the change is hard, but at the end, it's best.
Yeah, and young people in Mississippi have been moving to Tennessee and to Texas and to Florida to earn a good living. If we change the tax policy, if we get rid of income tax, that's a big step towards allowing them the opportunity to earn a living and prosper here in Mississippi. You shouldn't have to move out of Mississippi to do well.
It was good, and one of the reasons I wanted to play that from your Facebook and dude it up a little bit, but it's good to hear what Mississippi's assets are from someone on the outside, because there are many.
Absolutely. Mississippi has 4 major research universities and the Stennis NASA Space Center. It could be a thriving hub for innovation and venture capital, but it's got to fix some of its laws to make that possible. There's so much here in Mississippi, but we've got to ask, what is it that we're doing wrong that encourages businesses to move to Texas and Tennessee and Florida? We can fix this, but there's a lot here that we've got.
Part of that, the occupational licenses?
Absolutely. Occupational licensing is an extraordinary restrictive practice. It's the sort of thing you might have expected to have in sort of communist Eastern Europe. It prevents folk from earning a living without a permit. Now, you sometimes need a permit. I wouldn't want to get on an aeroplane or without a pilot who is certified. I wouldn't want to go and see a doctor unless they were certified. But do you really need some of the restrictive practices that prevent someone who can earn a living as a hairdresser from moving into Mississippi, coming to Mississippi, and doing that without taking several hundred hours of training? A lot of these occupational licenses are a way of rigging the market, vested interests, and that's got to change.
Not only were we talking about that, we were talking about several other things too, as far as the CONs, the certificates of needs need to be changed.
About 40 years ago, these laws, often very poorly understood, were created, and it created a system so that the existing suppliers of healthcare had a rigged market so that new competitors couldn't come in. Now, this is one of the reasons why Mississippi has worse healthcare outcomes. If you compare the health outcomes of folk in Mississippi to folk in other southern states, we do worse because of these certificates of need. They suit the doctors and the hospitals, and there's a reason why in Mississippi we've got a lot of well-paid doctors but very poor healthcare outcomes, because the market's rigged. If we get rid of these restrictive practices, we'll get better healthcare outcomes, and it means that poorer folk in Mississippi will be able to afford healthcare because it will drive the costs down.
Is your organization behind as far as the nurse practitioners movement?
We're not actually.
Interstate?
We've not actually been spearheading that, but I agree with the principle of reform. We have to be prepared to say to vested interests, look, people in Mississippi have a right to lower cost healthcare. And if that means we get rid of some of these restrictive practices, if there's not a clinical need for these restrictive practices, if the only reason we have these restrictive practices is to push the price up, that's got to go.
Do they have these laws embedded in England?
Unfortunately, they don't, but they've got such a socialized system where the government has run the system as a state-run monopoly for 50 years.
As far as healthcare is concerned.
Yeah, that it's even worse. Which is why, incidentally, the health outcomes of rich people in London using our socialized system are worse than those of poor folk in Mississippi using the system you've got. So don't lose sight of that. Socializing your system is not the answer.
One other thing here, we were talking about school choice. I don't know what it looks like across the pond, but and I mentioned earlier this morning, again, Douglas Carswell is my guest, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy. But I was mentioning earlier this morning, we came real close to having another Trump presidency for 4 years. And I believe from everything I've read, and everything that I think he's said in the past, that it was going to be one of the main things that he wanted to do was to make sure we had school choice, or at least have some inroads of school choice in this country. Won't happen now. As a matter of fact, we're going to go backwards.
Well, actually, Paul, I'm not sure that it can be done at a federal level, and I think this is one of the issues.
Well, I mean, as an advocate for that.
I think that, look at it this way. Everyone listening to this program will be familiar with the idea that you can shop around for groceries. If Walmart doesn't give you what you want, you go to the next shop. Why is it that when it comes to your kids' education, you have to put up with what you're given depending on the zone you live in? We wouldn't be prepared to allow people to buy groceries on that basis, so why do we put up with it for our kids' education? We need to allow ordinary people to have the choices and the opportunities that today only rich people have. And that's school choice.
And it's going to stay that way until the poorest of the poor, the minority, and it doesn't really matter, but as the poorest of the poor began to say, I'm tired of this.
This is what is so exciting about the school choice and the education opportunity agenda. In Louisiana and in Florida, it is ordinary mums and dads, often mums and dads from an African-American background, who are at the edge of the campaign in demanding for school choice.
When that happens, the tide will turn, and I'm not sure. You can see it happening a little bit. The advocacy for charter schools is getting a little larger.
Well, charter schools are good, but there are only 7 in the whole state, and we're going to have to wait a couple of centuries before it gets significant in numbers at this rate of growth. What we're doing at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy is trying to create a demand-led campaign for school choice, and that's exactly what we're doing, and I think we can turn the tide on this. It's wrong that people in Mississippi should have worse education outcomes than in other neighboring states, and the only way to fix this is through school choice.
We've tackled a lot of other things recently. We've made some great inroads. If this thing happens and there are better hearts over in the Senate, and we get this done, it'll be a remarkable session 2021.
Brexit was something I was very involved with in Britain, and that taught me big change is possible. If you stick to your principles and you argue for liberty, you can win.
Well, I haven't seen Brexit bankrupt the country yet, and I think it's been underway for a few weeks, hasn't it?
We were told that the planes would fall out of the sky and there would be a shortage of food. In fact, what's happened in Brexit Britain is, because we're not in the European Union, we were able to get our vaccine program underway, and we now have nearly 1 in 3 adults in the whole country vaccinated. Every adult will be vaccinated by the end of June. It's a brilliant example of what you can do if you're small and you're nimble. We need to make Mississippi smaller and nimbler.
Are the kids back in school there?
Back on March the 8th.
Back on March 8th, they go back to school.
Yeah.
Final thoughts from Douglas Carswell.
Mississippi is the best place in America, and I've been here for 7 weeks, and I wish I'd come here years ago. It is a wonderful place.
You've adapted to the food?
I'm still adapting. Do you know the biggest problem I've had since I've been here, Paul, is I've eaten far too much and I've put on weight. So I'm
welcome to the club, Douglas.
I'm going to have to go on a crash diet, I think.
Now, what have you found that you really, really like, and you called back home and said, man, they've got some stuff over here called?
I've talked about food before. I'm starting to discover the music. I mean, there's an incredible variety of music. There's the Delta music tradition,
blues.
Absolutely, it's been a revelation to me. But you know, if you move to the eastern part of the state, there's a very different, more sort of, I think, country and western type tradition. And
it is.
And then in the northeast, there's a different
Appalachian type music. Yeah,
and I'm loving it. I'm really getting into it.
Then if you go down on the coast, it depends on what you're smoking, but there are several different. I'm only kidding, all of you folks. I'm only kidding. It's just more relaxed. Really. It's always a pleasure talking to you, sir.
It's
good to
wonderful
have
be
you.
Here. Thank you so much.